This is an overview video on how to answer question 1 on paper 1 section B. We're going to be looking at what the examiner will be expecting and what you can do to score as many marks as you can. The question will always look like this. It will ask you to explain one way in which one particular topic in the years in one period were similar or different to that topic in the second period. That will be for 4 marks. In this question, you will always have to compare 2 periods. You'll be looking at a broader theme or broader topic that you can discuss elements of which in both of those periods. You will be awarded up to 2 marks for AO2, which is the quality of your comparison. Now that means that you need to be analytical rather than generalised. So rather than saying that in period A they did this, but in period B they did this, you need to explain why was that different, why did it change, what was the significance of those changes. By explaining the statements that you make, you show that you can be analytical rather than general, and therefore score higher on AO2. The other 2 marks are for AO1, which is your use and knowledge and understanding to support your judgments. So this is where you bring in your own knowledge, your own contextual understanding to support those explanations. You want to show the examiner that you know your stuff, so you want to bring in some relevant evidence from your own knowledge to support those explanations and those judgments that you've made when you're trying to compare the 2 periods. It's also important to note that the AOs depend on each other. That means that no matter how well you perform in one of them, if you haven't included any of the other, then unfortunately you hit what's called a mark ceiling, which means that you can't actually progress into the top band. That's why it's really important that you're analytical, but you're bringing in evidence at the same time. These are the bands for this question. Now you might notice in the lower band, we're seeing the word general pop up a couple of times. So a general comparison and your evidence is general. So that means that to score highly on this question, you need to have analytical comparisons, which are specific. So you're taking specific details from each of the periods to compare. And then you're bringing in relevant but specific evidence from your own knowledge to support those judgments that you've made. So the key point here really is be specific. That is how you score in the higher band for this question, and that is what the examiner is looking for, that you've got a really detailed knowledge of the topic. And you can use it to make an analytical comparison. Let's take a look at an example to see this put into action. So this is taken from the option on crime and punishment. And the question says, explain one way in which courts and trials in England were different in the medieval era to the early modern era. 4 marks. This is the mark scheme. So one example of a point you could make would be the difference in the role of the church. So you could say that in medieval England, the benefit of the clergy meant that someone could read a passage from the Bible aloud in a church court to prove that they worked for the church and therefore escape capital punishment. Whereas in the early modern era, more people were literate, so that rule was scrapped. Now that is a bit of a concise example, but if you can explain that a little bit further and what that actually meant, then that's a really good answer because you've highlighted the difference, you've got evidence from both periods to explain your point, and you've shown that you've got a really clear comparison between the 2 periods. And that is exactly what the examiner is looking for. Remember that you're thinking about AO2, so that quality of comparison, and you're thinking about AO1, so bringing in your own knowledge. And you can see really clearly in that example that we've got both of those AOs ticked off.